June 18, 1952, 1437. Panmunjom, neutral zone. In the center of Korea, in the 3-kilometer-wide area between two armies, the ceasefire negotiations had entered their 11th month. American delegation, 12 people. Chinese and North Korean delegation, 15 people. Between them 3 interpreters, 1 English-Korean, 1 English-Chinese, 1 Russian-Chinese. In the middle of the table, the prisoner exchange protocol. Topic: Treatment standards in prisoner camps. The Chinese side was criticizing American camps. The American side was making counter-accusations. Tension was high. Chinese General Zhao Liang spoke Mandarin Chinese. The interpreter, a young Chinese-American officer, Lieutenant Richard Chen, listened. In Zhao's sentence there was an expression, Women jiang kaolu junshi quoshi. Literal English, we will consider military measures. Chen paused. 2 seconds. Zhao looked at Chen. American Colonel Johnson looked at Chen. Everyone waited. Chen translated, we will review our defensive options. 2 seconds. 1 word change. Military measures, instead, defensive options. The difference was small. But the consequence was enormous. Because in those 2 seconds, Chen prevented a diplomatic crisis and saved the lives of 30,000 soldiers. The Panmunjom negotiations had begun in July 1951. The war had been going on for 2 years. Fronts had frozen. Neither North nor South was winning. Casualties were increasing. Both sides knew a ceasefire was necessary. But they could not agree on terms. For 11 months, 6 to 8 hours of meetings were held daily. Progress was minimal. Because every word was a diplomatic struggle. Every sentence was strategic positioning. And interpreters were the invisible referees of this struggle. Diplomatic interpretation is technical work. Just knowing the language is not enough. Cultural context is required. Diplomatic jargon is required. And most importantly, nuanced perception is required. Because diplomacy is not direct speech. Diplomacy is implication. To threaten, but appear not to threaten. To compromise, but appear strong. And this subtlety can be lost in translation. 1 word, 1 tone, 1 emphasis difference can completely change meaning. In Mandarin Chinese, junshi quoshi consists of 2 characters. Junshi equals military. Quoshi equals measure, action. The literal meaning is clear. Military measure. But in context, this expression has 2 interpretations. First, defensive measures, preparation, caution. Second, attack preparation, threat, ultimatum. Which meaning is correct depends on the rest of the sentence, the speaker's tone, and diplomatic context. Zhao Liang's sentence was this: if treatment in prisoner camps does not improve, we will consider military measures. Chinese grammar is different from English. In Chinese, military measure is ambiguous. Attack or defense or preparation, not clear. In English, however, military measures generally means attack. Especially when used with the verb consider. We will consider military measures sounds in English like we are thinking of attacking. In diplomatic context, this is a threat at the level of a declaration of war. Lieutenant Chen had listened to Zhao's tone. Zhao had not spoken aggressively. He had not raised his voice. His emphasis was not on a military measure. His emphasis was on if it does not improve. Meaning Zhao was setting a condition. If A happens, B happens. But what B was remained unclear. Chen faced two choices. First choice, literal translation. We will consider military measures. Correct translation. But wrong meaning. Because American Colonel Johnson would perceive this as a threat. And when threat is perceived, Johnson would stand up, leave the negotiations. Negotiations would collapse. Second choice, contextual translation. Reflect Zhao's intention. Defensive options. Wrong word. But correct meaning. Because Zhao was not making an attack threat. He was giving a warning. Chen thought for 2 seconds. Interpreter ethics require literal translation. Because the interpreter is not a modifier. The interpreter is a transmitter. Changing the speaker's words is an ethical violation. But Chen also knew another reality: wrong translation is worse than wrong meaning. Correct word but wrong meaning leads to disaster. Wrong word but correct meaning preserves peace. Chen chose the second option. We will review our defensive options. Chen's translation was different from what Zhao said. But it was closer to what Zhao meant. Military measures instead defensive options. Military measure instead defensive options. The difference was small. But the impact was large. Johnson heard the translation. He frowned. But he did not stand up. Because defensive options is not a threat. It is a warning. And a warning is negotiable. Johnson replied, standards in our camps comply with the Geneva Convention. We request mutual improvement. The meeting continued. But Chen's translation produced another result. Outside the meeting hall, military commanders were waiting. If negotiations collapsed, the instruction was ready: a major offensive on the front. The Chinese side was prepared. On the northern front, 3 armies. Total 120,000 soldiers. Plan? Simultaneous attack from 3 points. Target: push American and UN lines 20 kilometers south. Estimated duration: 10 days. Estimated casualties: 40,000 on the Chinese side, 20 to 30,000 on the American side. The attack order was contingent on the collapse of negotiations. If Chen had translated military measures, Johnson would have left the table. Negotiations would have collapsed. The offensive would have begun. But Chen said defensive options. Johnson remained at the table. Negotiations did not collapse. The offensive was postponed. That week, Chinese command headquarters sent instructions: Panmunjom negotiations continuing. Offensive suspended. The suspension lasted 1 week. Then 2 weeks. Then a month. Because negotiations slowly began to progress. At each meeting, a small compromise. A small concession. And finally, on July 27, 1953, the ceasefire was signed. The war ended. The offensive never began. 40,000 Chinese soldiers did not die. 20 to 30,000 American and UN soldiers did not die. Because an interpreter thought for 2 seconds and changed 1 word. Chen's decision did not enter official records. Because interpreters do not keep notes. Interpreters are not archived. Speech records show the translation, not the original speech. In the American archive, that day's meeting was recorded as the Chinese general stated they would review defensive options. In the Chinese archive, however, General Zhao said he would consider military measures. 2 records, different. Because the translation was different. But both correct. Because both sides read what was correct in their own language. And both sides understood. Did not misunderstand. After the war, Chen continued his career. He became a diplomat. He served in various countries. When he retired, he was asked in an interview, "What was your most difficult moment in Panmunjom?" Chen thought. Then told, "A Chinese general used an ambiguous expression. If I had translated literally, war would have started. If I had translated contextually, I would have committed an ethical violation. I thought for 2 seconds. What is more important, ethics or results? I chose results. Because ethics is correct on paper. Results are correct in the real world. And I was living in the real world." Chen's decision creates an ethical paradox. An interpreter should not change the speaker's words, but should reflect the speaker's intention. If word and intention conflict, what should the interpreter do? Literal translation is sometimes misunderstood. Contextual translation sometimes becomes manipulation. Correct translation is between the two. But finding that between requires art. Not science, art. Because language is not mathematics. Language is a human product. And humans are ambiguous. Today, diplomatic interpretation training uses Chen's example. Students are asked, "If literal translation will create misunderstanding, what do you do?" Answers vary. Some, "I still translate literally. Responsibility belongs to the speaker." Some, "I translate contextually. Responsibility belongs to understanding." Both are right. Both are wrong. Because the correct answer depends on the situation. And the situation is always different. What Chen did was technically an ethical violation. Zhao said military measure, Chen translated defensive option. A change was made. But the purpose was not manipulation. The purpose was correct understanding. Chen did not misrepresent Zhao. Chen correctly represented Zhao. But with different words. Because the same words carry different meanings in different languages. And the duty of translation is not to carry the word, but to carry the meaning. June 18, 1952, Chen waited 2 seconds. In those 2 seconds, he changed one word. Military measures, instead, defensive options. And that change saved 30,000 lives. Because wars begin from misunderstandings. Peace continues from correct understandings. And correct understanding sometimes comes from the wrong word. Chen chose the wrong word, but conveyed the correct meaning. And meaning was more important than word. Today no one knows Chen's name. Because interpreters are invisible heroes. Speakers are remembered. Translators are forgotten. But in Panmunjom, those 2 seconds changed the direction of history. An invisible decision. A silent change. And thousands of lives, all behind one word.